for joining us for another session of our Montessori conversations. And Deneen, would you mind introducing today's topic? Because I think you'll be better at it than I am.
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited about this one because it's, I think, something that we always think about as Montessorians, and especially if we're at the face of our school, if we're constantly interacting with parents. So today's theme is just communicating our Montessori message and how we can do that, and I can provide some tips, thoughts, ideas, and yeah, we'll take the conversation from there.
Yeah, I'm excited. I just went through this too, which is kind of nice and perfectly suited for the conversation. I did a tour of the toddler room at my uh, the Montessori school that my older son goes to, and we're probably going to dump my little guy in there right when he'll be 2 in April.
Mm-hmm.
So walked through the room and it's so funny because when I'm on this side of the marketing end of things, I'm like, oh yeah, it's easy, you just say these things, and then as the parent you get in there and it's even for me, and I've had a lot of exposure to it, it was a little overwhelming at times.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, if we think about, well, how I want to start this is just thinking about empathizing with, parents. Because as Montessorians, we get so in it and we're so passionate about what we do that we just can talk forever and ever and ever. And I don't think there's one Montessorian that I haven't met that isn't like, all I do is talk about Montessori. Because once you know it and you're in it, it becomes like a way of life because it just makes sense.
It's like CrossFit.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're a veteran Montessorian, you probably have experienced this where you get this like deer in a headlight look from parents because you're talking about things that don't necessarily connect with them. While it makes sense, like let's say you're using the words like normalization and absorbent mind. What is observation and how does that inform our decisions and human needs and tendencies? If this is the first interaction with the parent, they're probably going to not know what you're talking about.
Mm.
And what's unique about that is while your intentions may be really good, you kind of position yourself or isolate, the parents and put them in a way where they're questioning, well, should I know this? This sounds really interesting, but foreign to me. Am I supposed to know this? Or this is way too weird. I don't want to dive into what that is, And so what we want to do is try to avoid that dynamic. So we're not turning people off that truly could be really great fits for our schools.
Sure. And it's interesting too, because from a prereq standpoint, it's hard to. Some parents, I imagine, come really well equipped. They've done their research, they've done their reading. Maybe they came from another Montessori school. Maybe they're Montessorians themselves. And then some parents come total blank slates, and you don't want to be condescending. I mean, like, how do you figure out exactly where people are and where they sit?
Right. Well, and that's the golden question right there.
I'm not
You just
helping
have
out.
to be kind of like suave, you have to
Yeah.
kind of move in and out of it. But so what I do want to challenge some of our veteran Montessorians, and if you're not a veteran Montessorian, if you're kind of new to this, and consider yourself maybe a little bit lucky in this process, because I think it's really important for us to be able to pull ourselves out a little bit and remember what it felt like when you first experienced Montessori. And I'm going to share a little story about when I first experienced it, which was 12 years ago. I walked into a classroom and I observed, I think it was a toddler room and then a children's house classroom. And it was just very eerie. I was expecting to walk into a classroom where it's just very busy and loud and, all the kids are all over the place because, as when you think about Montessori, many people, when they first come in contact, think it's just a free-for-all.
Mm-hmm.
So when you walk into a classroom, a quality program, you get this like weird eerie feeling that it's really quiet and children are kind of beaten to their own drum, but doing it in a way that's like synergistic in the classroom, if that's even a word. I like that now. I'm gonna make it a word. And it was, for me, not experiencing that, it was very eerie and weird. And so I felt kind of like an outsider, and I didn't know where to start or begin and how to start those conversations about what's happening. What is truly going on in this classroom. So that feeling, I think we all need to remember, because I think almost everybody experiences that. And I don't know, Qasim, have you experienced that when you first interacted with
Oh yeah.
Montessori parent?
and I was a little prepared because I had been marketing for Matt for about a
Mm.
year and a half before I walked into my first Montessori classroom. He's in Sacramento. I'm in Scottsdale. I've never been, so I've always been a remote resource, let's call it. And so I
Mm.
had heard snippets a little bit from him on, the nitty gritty, because mostly he divines the marketing strategy, and then I'm a button pusher, let's say. Um, but I knew that the classrooms were, orderly, and the kids or the children had time to focus on things. I knew those were tenets of Montessori. But when I walked into the first classroom was a children's house class, um, and my first inclination, I think I asked the gal that was giving us a tour of this. I said, "Oh, what did they do wrong? Like, why are they all in, we're all in timeout apparently?" Because you're right, Erie is just the perfect way to put it. I'm used to, if you walk into a room that has 3 or more children, something should fly across the room the instant you walk in, and there needs to be something broken somewhere, and you probably should have some crying just for good form. And to round it all out, you need to have an adult in the room that is just without any control whatsoever and frazzled, and who looks at you like, of course, this is just the way things are. And that's what I was expecting. Like, I wanted the sitcom moment where you round the corner and you're like, yeah, this is what I expected to walk into, and that wasn't it at all. And it blew me away. And I wasn't impressed, to be honest with you. I was just intimidated, because,
Mm.
and Matt told me that this happens too. I looked at it and I was like, oh, there's no way. My oldest son's name is Sammy, and I was like, no way Sammy's doing this. Like, he's bouncing off the walls. And I was so wrong, but I could have been more prepared for it.
Right. Yeah, and I think, if we can recognize that fear, that, unknown or misunderstand, not, I guess, yeah, misunderstanding, because we're bringing, our previous ideas of what a group of children should be acting like, or experiencing. So those preconceived ideas, we have to remember those, and how we feel in that, because that's an opportunity right there to help ease the fears, right? And so, for, if you were visiting my school, what I would say to you is, it's a process, and in the back of my mind, it's normalization, which I know you and I have talked about, so what normalization is. But for Montessorians, it's that process of a child going from being kind of all over to very centered, focused, and working in the classroom in that rhythm. So that's a process. It takes time. It can take, a month. It can take 6 months. Sometimes it can take 2 to 3 years. So engaging in that conversations with the parents, I think, is really helpful, because it eases their fears. Like, it's okay. Your child will fit in, and that's a part of it. So that's definitely an opportunity, and it's important for us to remember that.
What can we do at Nido? I just wrote a note here of what you should know, type of infographic or check sheet. Is there something we can create for our schools, for our members, where you've scheduled a tour, you're coming in, you're doing an observation, and I send you this thing, and it's 4 bullet points or 20 bullet points or whatever. And I think it'd be really cool if it was an infographic. So there's, like, graphical representations of what we're talking about, because the checklist, nobody's going to read it, the checklist. But if we can make it really engaging, we can say things like, hey, you're going to notice the classroom's really quiet. That's okay, because etc. You're going to notice that there's multi-age class, and put all of it out up front, because then it's not quite the same level of shock. Do you think schools would use that?
I think so, and I think some schools do, or maybe many schools do, because it's really equipping your parents to learn how to observe,
Right.
and to kind of put and check your feelings at the door, and just be in the moment. And oftentimes that requires prepping them to do that. Many people don't just go into an environment and know exactly what to do, unless you have some ideas of what to focus on.
Can
So
we
yeah,
make it?
I think our schools would definitely benefit from it. I also, like I said, I think some other schools may be doing that already.
Yeah. Well, and if there's somebody who's if you're watching, and you have an asset like this, I'd love to have it, if you don't mind sharing. But I think maybe, Deneen, you and I put together, and I love what you just said, how to observe. I think that's really compelling. If I saw an email come through like that, and I think maybe most Montessori parents are probably along these lines, to where we are thinkers, let's say, and I would eat that up, because I want to know what the rules are, so I know whether or not I'm going to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Right. So, moving beyond empathizing with what your parents are experiencing, Just keeping it simple. I think we can talk and talk and talk, but having a very clear idea of what we want to portray for our school, I think, is really, really important.
Hmm.
So I want to take a moment to talk about just the language that we use, and how we can bridge the gap between the Montessori language and the common language that we would, bridge between parents in our schools. So we've got a list of things that we could talk about, from Montessorian to Montessorian, right? And again, when I say normalization, you would know what I was talking about. And I'm going to pretend that you're a Montessorian because you're almost one. Planes of development, what that is, we talk a lot about for the 4 planes of development. Sensitive periods are times in a child's development that are great times to bring in like language acquisition. So we talk specifically about that. The absorbent mind for the 0 to 6 year old. I'm getting a deer in a headlight look from you. See? That's exactly. So
Yeah.
my point is that we can't be using that language because we will lose somebody very quickly.
Right.
And so what we can do is focus on those main things in our classroom that actually highlight what we already know is super important, but bridges that gap. So let's look at normalization, for example. Talking about process versus product will definitely resonate with your prospective parents, because we are in a society now, especially in America, the product is really important. But the process behind it isn't often emphasized or even noted because the product is so important. And so in a Montessori classroom, that process is highlighted constantly. So for example, I had a conversation earlier today with a parent who was wondering why they don't get things sent home, and that their 4-year-old is, coming home saying that he ate snack. And that's the only thing that he could say about his whole day. You might be experiencing this with your little guy too.
Sure.
And you're like, really? That's what he's doing all day? And it's kind of alarming as a parent, right? Because it's like, well, you're supposed to be learning a whole bunch of other stuff. And the process that they go through to learn and to do, I mean, you probably don't know that he was, cutting carrots all day, or that he was working on his sounds, or that he helped another child tie his apron, or he worked through a conflict. Like, all those things are in the classroom. So if we can talk about that process that doesn't necessarily produce a product, but is like an investment in the bank account for your child, like their inner wealth, like they're
Sure.
becoming this person. So talking about that process, I think, is really, really important versus just saying what normalization is.
I love everything that you just said. I had the opportunity when we went and toured for Ronan, my toddler. We got to go upstairs and spy on Sammy in the children's house. And anytime I ask Sammy what he's doing, it's exactly what you just said. It's like, oh, I played. And that's about as far as it goes. Sometimes he'll tell me he played with his dinosaurs because he has what appears to be a whole tribe of imaginary dinosaurs that escort him around the city, apparently. But when we got to see him in the classroom, he didn't know that we were there, and he's sitting at this table. So there's this little desk, and it's his size, which he just loves. And then he's got this puzzle, and the puzzle is split up into these 10 strips and lines. And then he's got these pieces that he's putting into the puzzle, and you could just tell that, I mean, man, he was engaged and just focused. And of course, he comes home that day, and I'm like, hey, what'd you do? And he's like, oh, I played. But I saw him in the midst of doing the puzzle, and then later we got to see him walk up, and he actually like climbed the little stairs himself to the sink, and he washed his hands and little things like that. I thought to myself, like, oh, wow, that's really cool. That's there's just so much more to this than I gave credit for, and that was important for me to know.
Right. Yeah, and emphasize that. So I think we as schools need to think more about the narrative around that, because that's key, right? That's the thread in everything that we do. So I think we gotta getting better at that. Although I'm sure there's many people that are really good at that, but I'm gonna highlight that. Also, when you think about process versus product, the end result is that children get to learn how to love learning, which is another thing that we know parents are always looking for. That's what we want for our children, right? For them to enjoy what they're doing. And really the way to do that is that they experience the process without the emphasis on a product. Because if they're only focusing on what they're producing, they miss the whole process, and how important that process can feel to you, and really manifest in that love of learning. So again, something else that you can connect to with parents.
That's so interesting because I never really thought about this before, but from a philosophical perspective, it makes you wonder, is education a product or a process? And you're right, we look at it as a product. What's your SAT score? What's your GPA? Which, you know what I mean? Like, what college did you go to? But in terms of what was really valuable for me, and I think for most people, it's the process of getting there.
Right.
Yeah, I'd never, ever in my entire life would have considered that if you didn't bring it up.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, Montessori schools are positioned so well to have those conversations.
right.
Because it's what we do, it's what we believe in, and it's what we know parents understand. You know, I mean, that's the theme of this talk right now, is just you've got to be able to find that, the feeling that they have and the understanding that they currently have of what they want for their children, and bridge that without the Montessori jargon.
Right.
Because while we know that things are important, normalization is important, observation is important, human needs and tendencies, we know that that's who we are as schools. But how can we allow a parent in that has no experience, or maybe not great experience? You know, maybe they're coming in thinking that their child can do whatever they want, and that's absolutely not what we do at Montessori, you know, in Montessori. So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about observation. You know, when you walk into a classroom, it's not teacher led; it is child led. So when we think about that, how then, which this happens all the time, I'm sure, I've experienced that, where parents ask, well, how do you know where my child is at? If you're not having a group of children go through the same curriculum and they're producing certain things so that you can see if they are understanding the concept, how do you know where my child is at? And really, in a Montessori classroom, it's observation. You know, observation by the guide, specifically in everything that they do, informs their decisions. And it's constant, you know, like while a guide in a 3 to 6 year old classroom is sitting with a child giving a presentation, she or he is also scanning the room and checking and taking notes. There's also times where they put aside where they're just observing the classroom as a whole. And there's a neat thing that we do in our classrooms where we have the teacher is observing, the guide is observing, and the children know that, and so they cannot interact with this teacher. It's as if, you know, they're a fly on the wall, and they know that because it's important for that classroom to operate. Because while it's not teacher led, it is teacher facilitated in ways that she or he is responding to her observation. So being able to talk about that, because I know parents have that fear of, well, how is my child just not going to go into the background, right? Because if it's child led, what happens if my child is only doing art all day long forever and ever and ever? You know, so conversations around that and creating that narrative.
This gets more combative than it should, I think, for this call. But if my child is only doing art forever and ever and ever, that would kind of excite me. Like, oh my goodness, you mean you found what this person is passionate enough about to focus for hours on end? Let's just pursue that. Who has that opportunity?
Right.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is I'm a Montessori parent. I help schools market themselves, and I didn't know most of what you just said. And maybe that's
well. So if we talk about the parent life cycle, which I know you and I have talked about, and I'm hoping that we can create something for Nido that helps our schools understand that there is a cycle that our parents go through. You know, prospective parents and then our current parents. So understanding that process, similar to understanding children. You know, we know that when the process of child development, but can we think of parent development in a similar way?
Right.
It's important. So, but to kind of piggyback off of what you said, I think, you know, another element of our classrooms is mixed age groups, which then helps us or gives us more freedom, us as guides and adults in the classroom, to let children do art for extended periods of time. We don't have a set curriculum that we have to get through. You know, we're able to allow that, and then also have a conversation with the child about accountability. This usually happens around the kindergarten year because you're preparing a child for, a much more rigorous curriculum where there are things that you're going to have to say no to, even though you want to do it. But we have the flexibility in helping you express that. So the conversations that can happen between the guide and the child are really, really helpful. But that's all because we have mixed age classrooms.
Right.
You don't see that too often in a traditional setting.
I'd never seen it before. The observation we did, it was either yesterday or the day before, but I saw a young man, little boy, take a lockbox. So it's this little house with all these different doors and locks on it. And he took it off of the bookshelf and he brought it down and he played with it for a little bit and then he walked away. And then the guide asked him to clean it up and then he didn't clean it up. And so she tasked another little boy who's a little bit bigger than him and said, "Hey, I don't remember his name, Corey, can you help Aaron clean up the lockbox?" And there was an element of, I'm going to use the wrong words here, but it was almost like public shaming in a way, to where now, Corey has to do what Aaron didn't do and Aaron realizes that, but at the same time, it's coming from a peer and not from a teacher. So it feels more accessible. And then instantly, like, Corey goes and grabs the box, and then Aaron like comes running back, realizing that now he needs to help because he lightened the load. And it was just, I'd never seen anything like that. And it was cool to watch, this little boy help this littler boy, and the growth opportunity for both of them there. And you wonder, who's benefiting more. And I don't think there's an answer to that, but to be able to take somebody on your wing like that and guide them, and the amount of worth that I imagine that gives somebody in purpose and self, like, I think that's really cool too.
Right.
Yeah. So that's something that I was really excited about for my kids.
Right. And if you think about, you've been in contact with Montessori for a few years now, so you're a little bit farther along than a brand new parent. But if you think about that process, you have some foundational understanding of why that's important, right? And so for you to be able to go into a classroom and observe that and see that, you understand that the mixed age grouping is important to that process. The 3-hour work cycle, allowing children to work for extended periods of time and concentrate, you see that. But not every parent does. And so we need to do a really good job of explaining why those elements are really important in our classrooms, because it creates this organic growth that we have no control over.
Right.
This the interaction you're talking about happened organically, right? And that's what we hope for in our children. We want to have them notice when they did something or they forgot about something, or that, oh, maybe somebody else is doing this for me, and they empathize, like they shouldn't be doing that, so I'm going to do it. There's so much in that dynamic that we don't necessarily need to teach. We just need to give the space for that to happen.
Because when else would it happen? Unless we're, sort of orchestrating these little situations. It's not like there's a society of children that they're allowed to join.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, there's somebody vacuuming over there. Do you hear it? I hope not. Okay, because I've got the speaker on. Yeah. So it's important to talk about mixed age groups. I think also identifying that our adults are trained, and they're trained well. The rigor that they go through to be able to be in that classroom and help create an environment that is rich for these children to experience such great growth, you have to be trained. And to emphasize that with your parents, you celebrate your guides and your teachers, because they are your greatest asset when you walk in there. So, and you want your prospective parents to see that and to notice that and to feel connected, because ultimately, as a parent, you want to make sure that the person that is interacting with your child, sometimes even more than you do, just because we all have to work and they're with our children more than we are.
Oh, yeah.
You want to make sure that adult knows what they're doing. So definitely talk about that and create some narrative around that.
One of the gaps, and I don't know if this really falls in line perfectly with this conversation, but you made me think of it just now, and it's something you and I have already talked about. The gap I feel as a parent when it comes to understanding Montessori is what I need to do, what my responsibilities are. I don't have clarity on that just yet. And I kind of worry, like, okay, so I'm sending my son off to this school, and it's time consuming, it's expensive, and it's a commitment, and these wonderful people that I really care about and trust are helping to mold him. and then they're sending him back to me, and then I'm like ruining that mold a little bit, and maybe potentially, working against it or being counterproductive, or what are the things that I'm doing that aren't aligned with, that aren't consistent, that aren't maintaining continuity where they should. I would love it if, and this isn't an indictment of the school that he goes to, I think it's a hard thing to do, but I would love it if there was something that let me, dad, and my wife, mom, know, here's where you participate, and this is what's important from you. And there's like tidbits of that every now and again, but there's not enough for me to feel really comfortable or confident about it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I know I've hinted at this in the past, and I really do mean it when I say that Montessori schools are a parenting partner. And I don't mean it in a way that like we do the parenting and that, you just hang out with your kids, which can be the perception, right? Because we're doing so much work with them.
Sure.
But oftentimes what we see in our classrooms in an environment that is absolutely suited to their needs at a given time, they go home to you, and then of course those challenges come out, right? They're tired, they've been holding it together all day. There are things that are accessible to them that are not in the classroom. So it's kind of a controlled environment, and at home it's not. And so the challenges that you see at home aren't necessarily the challenges we see in the classroom. But we can definitely help bridge what you can do and what we do. So like we're sharing the same language that's happening in the classroom. We're sharing the same approach. We're offering choices. So it would be neat actually for us to create something that for our schools that you can give to your parents of what you can do at home. And I know for a fact schools have gone through that and have thought about it and probably created some things. But, I think every school could benefit from that, because every parent is going to get to a point where you're at, where it's like all this amazing stuff is happening, but I don't want to ruin it. It's hard. Parenting is hard. Oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
Like once you think you got it, and then you're like, no,
well, you get it, and then they grow up a little bit, like it's like, okay, I know how to parent a 3-year-old now. Happy birthday. And
and having somebody, know your child well enough, and also know you well enough to say, like, this is totally normal. You're going to see this. I oftentimes had conversations, because I was a lower elementary teacher, and so that's right on the cusp of going from first plane, which is a very independent, self-focused, to a more social child in the second plane. There's some things in there that you're going to notice, and you'll be like, where did my sweet child go? Now they're kind of rude, and they're just wearing the same clothes every day. And I mean, there's characteristics of a second plane child that parents, I think, don't anticipate happening. And so if you've got an adult there that can help you with that, it's nice to have.
That'd be huge. Well, and like you said, it's an objective party too, because we're so close to it.
Right.
And maybe objective is the wrong word. It's not like there's not a stake in it. But you know what I mean? Somebody who's from the outside looking in. You mentioned protected concentration on one of the webinars that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it shamed me a little bit, because I realized that I don't do that well with my son at all. And had the school equipped him with the language necessary for him to articulate the fact that he was within the confines of protected concentration, if we were at home and he gave that to me, I would take that as, that's insubordination, that's timeout. Because I don't know, and that's egg on my face a little bit. But I love the idea of a training course, or the Montessori Parent 101 guide. Just a couple of quick, here's what you need to know, and then we genericize it enough to match most of our schools, and then they can customize what they need to customize. Let's do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm super passionate about too, because it's parents, we got to help them out, because I'm thankful now that there is this new wave of interest in Montessori that I think, kind of ebbs and flows. But recently, especially as we're really looking at how education is delivered, Montessori has always been kind of quietly consistent, but it's coming to the forefront of a lot of conversations. In fact, I just saw the head of school in Calgary, Canada, and she spoke so clearly on the news about what Montessori education is, and the conversation's happening. So if you're feeling isolated at your school, like you've got to do all this stuff on your own, just know that the conversation is happening and people are truly noticing what Montessori is about. So let's remember that for sure.
Well said.
Yeah.
That's exciting. This is a good talk, Denise. I appreciate this topic.
Yeah. I love this stuff. There's one thing that I want to mention. One of my friends actually just mentioned this. She does this at her school. Having a dictionary of terms for your parents. So, if you hear guides talk about it, because again, we can talk so much about Montessori. Here's some things that I want you to learn about what we do. So, like, instead of a teacher, we call it a guide. Have that in your dictionary. What does the absorbent mind mean, and how do we address it? What's a 3-hour work cycle? So just a dictionary of terms that you just give to your parents, and they can read it at leisure. It's not like they have to memorize it or they're going to test them on it, but it's at least something that they can reference throughout their journey with you at your school.
Can we make that? Is that something that we can do?
Yeah. Yes, that's a good idea. Oh my gosh, look at all these action items we're coming up with.
So maybe that's something we ask Christy for as like a blog. Like if she were to write, and she's got a really good recurring schedule, so I don't want to mess it up too much. But if she were to write a glossary of terms and then just add to it once a quarter, and it just starts to grow, and it's something that can be, an independent blog, but also sort of this amalgamized, ever-growing asset that we make available to our schools. I think that'd be great.
Right. I know we have a dictionary for marketing terms. So
we do
the same thing for Montessori.
Yeah, so many ideas are just semantically inaccessible. As soon as you get the jargon down, it becomes easy. I feel that way about accounting. I hate accounting. I hate it because it just scares me away. But then as soon as I understand the words, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, these two things match. Great.
Right. Right. Well, and Montessori just makes so much sense, right? When you really, really know it and see it and experience it, it fits into place. And that's why I think, once you're in it, because it just becomes that way of life, which is where some of us can get off track because we speak so much about it and almost assume that other people know it and get it because why not? It makes sense,
right.
But continuing to remember that we were once in a place where it was scary or we didn't know what was happening or it just felt weird or you question whether or not your child or you would even be able to fit in this environment. Remembering that and letting that inform how we connect with our parents, I think is important.
I agree.
Cool. All right. This is a good conversation.
Yeah. And for everybody who's listening, we do this live every Thursday. It's 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. We've got a really cool little round robin. It's a rotation of topics coming across. We talk about tech. We talk about Montessori specific topics. We have a guest speaker coming, I think, week after next or something, right?
Yes, I think maybe even next week, actually.
Yeah, which is great. And Matt will be doing Ask Me Anything. He's actually out of commission right now, but he's coming back into the fold, I think, sometime in April. But short version of long stories, we'd love to see you here. We'd love to see you here. We'd love to have you participate. We'd love to have you submit any questions that you have, any topics you want us to discuss. This is about you, and we're creating this for you. I also realize that I've sort of slipped down here over the course of this conversation. I'm getting lazy. But yeah, this is great. Denise, very, very, very well done. This was an awesome topic.
Yeah. And, if you notice in this conversation, we came up with like 4 or 5 different action items. So if you're able to participate in this call, I think it's helpful to remember that if you've got ideas, we might come up with an action item that's going to support your school. So yeah, joining these calls is helpful because you've got us here and we've got, ideas, thoughts, and we love to hear, about your experience and what you're doing.
Absolutely. We've got a whole agency of people just sitting around waiting for you to tell us what to do.
We do. We'll come up with ideas anyway, but it's always fun to hear what other people need and want.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we hope to see everybody next Thursday. And other than that, good talk.
All right. Sounds good. Take care, everyone.
All righty, bye.